in. Thank you. So we're live now.
Okay. Good morning. It's Friday, March 25th, and we are meeting. This is the House Sexual Harassment Prevention Panel meeting, and we are here, some people on Zoom and some people in person, and maybe we should just go around, and I don't know if everybody, if Arlene has met everyone. So we have our new Director of Human, what do you call it?
Resources, human resources.
Okay. Arlene
Donovan.
Okay. And of course, Damian Leonard from Ledge Council, Patricia McCoy, Representative McCoy, Representative Murwicki, Senator Hardy, who's the chair of the Senate Sexual Harassment Prevention HIP panel, which is great that you can be here. Mike Ferrant, Director of Operations. Did I get that right? And
That's correct.
Jen Carby from Ledge Council, and I'm Representative Burke. Okay, so I think according to the agenda, we need to vote on the resolution to be able to be remote when we're not in session in case there are any issues that come up. So how do we do that?
So I'll walk you through the resolution quickly, and then I'm still logging into the meeting here. I'm sorry. So for those of you who are remote, it is on the website. And then I will
Share data.
sure, that would be great, Mike. Thank you. So what this does is, under the existing House rules, you currently don't have permission to meet remotely when the General Assembly is not in session. Obviously, when we're here, you can all meet in person. So what this does is it makes a few technical changes early on. If we could scroll down to little subsection C there. So just bring it down a half a page.
That's weird.
He is, but it's not showing.
Okay, well, so while we work on those technical difficulties there, in subsection C, I've struck out the word policy and replaced it with rule because we're in the House rules. Even though the House rule says it is the policy of the House that the House is opposed to and prohibits sexual harassment without qualification. However, to avoid confusion with the policy that this panel adopts and the rule, I've changed that to rule. I added in the word office after speakers. That was just a missing word. And then going down to subdivision 4, to clarify that you actually do adopt a policy against sexual harassment, because that's not actually in the rule right now. I've added that in subdivision 4, adopt policy against sexual harassment in compliance with 21 VSA 495H and as necessary to implement this rule. So that basically is if there are changes in the rule that go beyond the requirements of the law on the sexual harassment policy, which is 21 VSA 495H, this would require that you follow the stricter standards in the rule. Going on to the next page, I've struck out the policy set forth in this rule because we're just referring to provide copies of this rule and the adopted procedures and policy against sexual harassment to all members of the House and employees of the Speaker's office and the office of the clerk. The only thing in there that might raise a question is providing copies of this rule, because I think House members get copies of the rules as a House member. I don't really know how that works, but otherwise this actually requires you to provide a copy of Rule 90C to the House members together with the procedures and policy. So just something to flag for discussion that you may want to revise.
Would it need to be a hard copy or an electronic copy, or?
Could be an electronic copy. So It just says provide a copy, so it doesn't designate electronic or hard. So you could just provide a link and say we're pursuant to Rule 90C, which is available at this link. So that actually would solve that. Thank you for thinking practically this morning. I've had a quarter of a cup of coffee right now, so I apologize if I'm a little rough. In number 5, though, is the main change here. We do another technical change just to add in a reference to the Speaker's office. But then we add the sentence that says the panel may meet remotely during adjournment to consider complaints as set forth in the panel's adopted procedures. So that would give you authority to consider complaints under your procedures if something comes up in July or August when we're not here. Are there questions, concerns, changes?
No, and sorry, but I neglected to introduce our electronic members of the committee today, Representative Feltus and Representative Bloomley. My apologies. Well, shall we just, do we need to, should I move? Do we do that? Do we have to, do you have a question?
A quick question. Down section 9, report.
Yes.
Annually on or before the harassment panel shall report. Do we have a process set up, Molly, for who's going to do the report and who?
Well, I don't know. My recollection, I think maybe Jen or someone emailed me to say, were there any complaints this year? And the answer was no. And I think that was the extent of it, but I may be wrong.
Don't believe we have complied with this. I don't believe we've had a report for the last couple of years. I had not gotten responses back from the chairs of either House or Senate panels about whether there had been any complaints. There was a lot going on with remote session and otherwise. Yeah. So I think it might be good, at least informally, for you to have a sense for what the process would look like going forward.
We don't need to do it now, Molly. I just wanted to make sure that we thought about that and figured it out before December 31st.
Yeah, so typically what's happened is when the reports were filed back before the pandemic sent us all remote, is that the chairs would speak with Ledge Council. Ledge Council would draft a very short letter that said, you know, this past year we had, you know, 0 formal complaints filed and 3 requests for advice, you know, and then that would be it. Or if there was a complaint, it would be, you know, we had a complaint filed and the disposition was blank, you know, whether it was dismissed or substantiated with a recommendation or something like
and
that.
This is a public report.
Yes, it does get filed. I mean, it gets posted on with the rest of the reports on the website.
And that's why my next suggestion at a subsequent meeting, we should probably talk about how we present that. Of course, it could be a slow news day and somebody's looking for a story.
Mhm.
We'll put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
So I think this would be just like any other resolution or bill coming out of a committee. You'd have a motion right now. It has the 5 members of the panel signed on as sponsors for the resolution. And then you would bring it to the clerk's office, and then the clerk's office would determine in consultation with the speaker as to whether it goes straight to the floor or goes to the House Rules Committee. My presumption is it would go to the Rules Committee for consideration before it goes to the floor. I think when Ethics did it, there were some amendments. Is that right, Jen?
Okay.
Yeah. So that would probably be the next step, is to send it to the clerk and then get it referred to Rules.
So do we need a motion to?
So I just have, so this isn't a rule yet. So are the 3 of us the only ones allowed to vote? And or do we have quorum?
You do have a quorum because it's
Okay.
a 5-person committee.
So that's just my question, because this really, we can't do this with, I don't think, Representative Feltus or Bloomley can vote on this,
Okay,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, neither of you have an authorization to vote remotely right now, right? Yeah, I can see,
Are you okay with this? We can just get your okay on it, okay?
Will they be in the building?
Yes, I think it's a good idea.
As do I.
You can hold the vote open.
Yeah, will you be in the building later?
Yes,
Yes,
We can hold the vote open.
okay.
that's
Great.
good.
Patty's idea, not mine.
So would you like a motion to adopt,
no, do you want to make the motion?
propose, I don't know, draft 1.1?
Mhm.
For recommending, for amending the rules?
Yeah.
For the sexual harassment prevention panel.
Okay, I'll second.
Okay, all right, so. Alphabetical order. So
First.
I forget what we do. We have to just say, just call the roll.
Yep.
Right,
Do-
okay, all right, Representative. MRMC, go ahead.
Aye.
Representative Maricki,
Aye.
Representative Burke, aye. And we will hold the vote open for the other two members. Okay,
Great.
trying to think of MC, or where did you come in the alphabet?
You must stop listening to roll calls when you get to the M's, because I. Mary Morrissey is right
MC is
before me.
first, but I looked at this and I came before myself. Okay.
That Department of Labor link you sent me isn't generating anything that's saying that the page can't be found.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well,
just as a heads up.
I will give you a hard copy here and then I'll get you a better link.
So a question, so how do we, when we go to get their votes, what do we need a signature? What do we, how do we do this to make that
Well,
formal?
typically there's a voting sheet. So I think, I'm not sure, can we print one of those out, Mike?
I can't print it right here, right now, but I can definitely get a
Okay.
record of action generated.
All right, so I will collect it.
Okay.
And then we will all sign it.
Everybody should be on the floor this
Yeah,
morning.
so I can get the signatures and deliver it to the clerk.
I'll bring it to you, Representative Burke.
Okay, thank you very much. All right,
So do you want to start with the next piece, Arlene, or do you want me to start it?
started.
Okay. So Arlene and I met between our last meeting and this meeting to go over the current policy. And you'll see the handout here labeled, it's a one-pager that says proposed changes to the policy. So without actually drafting anything, because we wanted to get guidance from the panel as to how to proceed, these are the proposed changes that we came up with. I'll start with the minor ones at the bottom. So starting with number 4, just the policies all need to be updated because we've done legislative restructuring. So it needs to reflect the new offices. And in particular, it needs to incorporate Arlene's Office of Legislative Human Resources because they're a resource for not only individuals who have reported harassment, but references need to be added for supervisors and others to consult, including this panel, to consult with the Office of Human Resources if there's a complaint or an issue raised. So that's a very important change that's going to require a number of small changes throughout the policy to add both the consultation and the contact information. And then I'll tackle 1 and 2 together because they really go together and that's the meat of the proposal here. So in reviewing the proposal, I think literally Arlene's first comment to me is this policy is so long.
It's long.
So and one of the reasons for that is we have really combined the policy and the procedural rules of the panel into one document. So it becomes really a challenging document for the average individual to read if they're trying to figure out what their options are And as I think for those of you who worked on the revisions when we worked on them before the pandemic, you'll remember it got very complicated in the procedural rules. And so imagine if you're trying to go through that without the benefit of multiple meetings with council to try to parse your way through each step of the process. And then trying to figure out, getting buried in that, and then not even getting to the point of, okay, I'm going to file a complaint, but just going, my God, this is so complicated. I don't know what to do. So that was one of the first things. So if we break out the policy into something more similar to the model policy that Mike just pulled up here, which is available at the Department of Labor's website.
I posted it to this panel's website too.
Great. So this is also posted on the panel's website. That really focuses on the information that's required by the law, which is a statement that sexual harassment is unlawful and prohibited in the workplace, a statement that retaliation is unlawful and prohibited, a description and examples of harassment. And so this is all stuff we currently have in the policy. A section identifying the consequences for employees or members who commit sexual harassment. So, and then a description of the process for internal complaints. And this, in our current policy, we cover this with the long pages and pages of procedure. The shorter policy, I started roughing this out, and the shorter policy could literally do it in like a quarter to a half a page, just saying, these are your options. You could pursue, speak to your supervisor, speak to human resources, bring an informal complaint or bring a formal complaint, or talk to the harasser yourself. And then, so that is a, much more trimmed down and kind of lets people say, okay, what am I comfortable with? And then if they want to pursue the formal complaint, then they can turn to the panel's procedural rules. Importantly, though, one thing we lack is contact information for the panel members. And also for one reason why it would make sense to break out the policy too is you can tailor it to the offices so that the contact information for your supervisor and Arlene or whoever is above you. So if it's in the house, contact information, for example, the speaker's office, who to contact there, and then who to contact on the panel, et cetera. So you could potentially talk to someone in the speaker's office or the panel or just the panel, and you can figure out how you want to structure that. But that's obviously very different than someone in, for example, ledge counsel, whose first two lines of contact might be Jen and Arlene before they even get to the panel. It might be, hey, I'm having an issue, and I'm not even sure if this is sexual harassment, but my work experience is really uncomfortable and I want to talk to you about it. And then they can start helping to guide the process from there. So that would be one of the benefits of breaking out the policies, is being able to just tailor some of the contact information to each office. Because otherwise you'll have about 3 pages of contact information for every office in the legislature. And then finally, summarizing the complaint process for state and federal employment discrimination agencies and providing contact information. Right now, we provide contact information and say you could file a complaint with them. The one thing the model policy does is if you go down to the very bottom where Mike has gone, you're fine there, is it talks about, it gives a little bit more detail about how the agencies may conduct investigations, facilitate conciliation. So it's a high level summary, but it still gives you a little bit more depth than our current policy does. And I think that would be a potential improvement, just so people understand, like, if I contact the EEOC, what's going to happen? So that would be the policy there. And then, as I mentioned, separating them out would allow them to be tailored. And The other thing that would need tailoring is the consequences. So obviously the consequences for a member are different than for a staff person. So a staff person, consequences range from reprimand and training to loss of vacation days, all the way up to firing. For a member, consequences could range from a reprimand to training to censure or something like that. That's not open, or not an available consequence for a staff person. So there are some differences there. And then the final piece here is that with the procedural rules right now, there's a lot of time spent trying to map out, what happens with each different body. And by separating out the procedural rules, again, each of the three panels, the House panel, the Senate panel, and the joint panel, could set up their procedural rules internally, because there are slight differences in procedure. The joint panel has a rotating chairmanship, and the House panel and the Senate panel have different legal counsel, that sort of thing. So there are slight differences. The other advantage of that too, and this is from experience working with the discrimination prevention panel, is as you get complaints or inquiries filed with the panel, you start to see that, hey, this rule needs an adjustment. And so you could just, instead of readopting the whole policy, going through that process, you could make an adjustment to your internal procedural rules and just say, we're just amending, Rule 6 relating to how you submit your documents or something like that, to address this issue that we realized after actually implementing the rule in relation to a hearing that we'd never thought of. So that's another advantage there too. Instead of going through, dedicating a huge amount of time to going through the entire policy every 2 years and all of the procedural rules every 2 years, this would allow you to focus more on just sort of fixing what needs fixing and leaving the other parts. What did I leave out, Arlene?
No, I think you covered it all. I think, the policy you have is very detailed, but it is long. And I think the goal really in the end is to make sure that people can find their resources quickly and they know what their rights are. And, you want it to be enforceable, of course. So I think breaking it out makes a lot of sense to me. It's much more in line with what I'm used to, or, modeling a policy similar to this one that we have, or we had up on the screen. It just makes a lot of sense.
It's great to have you here. I know that was, we realized that we should wait until we had a human resources person here before working further on the policy. So this is great. Representative Bloomley, I know you have to leave, so feel free to leave whenever you need to, okay?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this. I look forward to working on it with you all.
So how should we, that sounds like a very good plan to me. And I just wanted to ask the question. I remember that one of the things that when we sort of started revising the policy, and was it 2020, whenever all those years are sort of a blur, that there were concerns from the, I think it was from the Director of Human Rights about some of the, does this address those?
The amendments that you were working on when we left off, when the Senate decided that they wanted to hold off on making changes until Arlene was hired, those amendments, which were in the draft, I think distributed at our last meeting, those reflect the concerns that were expressed by the Human Rights Commission after we met with them to get an audit of our policy and say, what looks good in here and what needs to change. And so I think the next step would be to take that, and if the committee wants to move in this direction, take what we had there and then make the changes outlined on this handout to that, and then move from there. So, there were, I think, some procedural changes. There are some wording changes that around the definition that we want to discuss too. that have come up in recent discussions and in the legislature related to those issues. But mostly it would be just taking this and applying it to that document with the updates for the offices and breaking out the policy and procedures. And then we could move forward one piece at a time from there. And I know, the idea, I think the goal is still to have a policy that's sort of a unified policy in terms of what's prohibited for the entire General Assembly. And I know Senator Hardy's here sitting in. And then the procedures, again, would try to be as similar as possible with the small differences that have to occur because of the uniqueness of each panel. So I could start with sort of mapping out what the House policy and the procedures for the panel look like. And then we could highlight where things would change if it was broken out for like the Office of Legislative Counsel or the Office of Legislative Operations. What information would change. And then obviously there will be some questions there, for example, whether you want to identify for the House, the Speaker's office as a place to bring complaints, or whether you want them all to come to the panel as sort of the House for it. The reason I mentioned the Speaker's office is because the Speaker is sort of the head of the House. Supervisors under the law have a legal obligation to stop harassment from continuing if they become aware of it. So even if a complaint isn't filed, the Speaker or the pro tem has a legal obligation, if they've become aware of something that's happening in their chamber, to take action to prevent it from continuing. In the same way that Jen or Mike would for our offices, if they become aware of an employee who's experiencing sexual harassment, they have an obligation to take steps, even if that employee doesn't want to pursue a complaint with the panel. But that's something that you don't have to decide today. We can just leave a placeholder there with the panel's contact information and just a question of anyone else.
So we would just start by going through whatever you're going to prepare and incorporates this.
Yeah.
And then we can just proceed from there, make decisions as we go along.
Great. And the benefit of doing it split out too is that when one document's ready, you could send that over to the Senate panel to consider while you work on the next one. And hopefully that'll speed up the process.
Is there a crossover date for that?
It would be really nice if we could hopefully get this done
Finally.
Yeah.
before we adjourn.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question? Just of Damien? Can I ask Damien
Oh,
a
sure.
question? Okay. So I'm trying to remember from 2 years back, but the policies right now there are different policies, right? And
No, they are the same.
They are
So
the
the
same.
House tentatively voted to adopt when the Senate agreed to it.
okay,
So they sent it over for Senate approval, and then that's when the Senate panel said, hey, we're about to hire an HR director and we're looking at legislative restructuring. Let's put the brakes on this until that's done, and then we'll revisit this. So
Right,
we
so
do
we
have
have- the
we have a
Senate
joint
never voted,
policy.
right? Okay,
Yeah, so we have a joint policy, but the Senate, I think after the sort of initial walkthrough, put the brakes on it because the panel at that time wanted to wait for Arlene to be hired and for the other moving pieces to settle out. So,
okay. So, but the process would be, this panel would pass something, it would pass through the whole full House and then come over to the Senate.
I think it would be, this panel would finalize it and send it to your
Okay.
panel. And then when both panels have agreed, that's when you would bring it to your chambers as a revised policy.
Thank you for
That way we don't have, yeah, it's not as complicated as a bill
Okay,
where, because this doesn't have to go to the governor or anything like that. This
Well,
is
yeah.
an internal policy. So it's really just a process of making sure you're not, working at cross purposes or something like that.
Exactly. That's what I want to avoid. And having it so there's one procedure too, so that, because sometimes there are issues that would cross houses potentially.
Yeah, and I think the goal with the rules of procedure would be to make them in all the essential sort of things that matter to someone bringing a complaint, make them identical, and then at the sort of unique pieces where, you know, like the Senate secretary is the counsel to the Senate panel, ledge counsel is the counsel to the House panel. In those instances, there would be differences within the procedures.
Great, thank you.
And who is the chair? I know it was an alternating chair of the joint panel.
I honestly don't know.
Yeah, it was
So, but yeah,
using those years that sort of.
Yeah, the way the joint panel works is, I believe it's 2 members from each panel. It could be 3. It's the chairs and then 1 or 2 other members from the panel. And then it alternates who the chair is, but I don't know.
No.
So one of you
One of
would
us.
be the chair of the
You can
joint
go
panel.
first, Molly.
So, yeah.
My comment before though was actually to hold up the concern of setting a timeline, because I hope we can finish this before adjournment. And,
Right.
you know, things are starting to speed up already.
I agree. So to that, and I know this is a good time to meet, but because of the discrimination panel that meets on the alternate Friday, do we want to wait 2 weeks to meet, or do we want to try to schedule another meeting in a week?
So they are meeting next week to
Yeah.
consider their own version of the remote meeting resolution. That said, there's more attorneys at Ledge Council, so I don't want to speak for Jen, but we could potentially divide and conquer. So
You feel we should meet in a week?
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, we only have like 6 weeks left or something, maybe, which wouldn't really be very, yeah, I think we should too. Is this, we would just need to find a space, but this seems to be, is this a good time for members? Marty's
Yes.
saying yes. Yeah, okay. So we'll meet next week, 8:30 to 9:30. And Mike, if you can help us with the space, or shall I go to Sid, or how should we do this?
So I staff the House discrimination panel, and there isn't an army of mics. Much as I would
Really?
love that.
You're everywhere.
Well, so, but I can ask Peggy, the lady, if you can cover
Okay,
your panel. Depending on what the judiciary, her standing committee has going on, we
Okay.
can find somebody to do it. If you wouldn't mind talking to Sid about the
I'll talk
room,
to Sid.
we
Okay.
can take care of the agenda and the Zoom and
Okay.
all the rest.
So we do need a place where we can also have access to the Zoom option, I think, even though now we find out that people on Zoom cannot vote. So how would that work if we're adopting like certain provisions of the policy, or would the whole policy be voted on after we work on it?
I think it would be after you finalize the language.
All right,
Yeah, so that we would just have to make sure everyone's present in a room for a vote.
we can't have people participating in the discussion of the policy while we're doing it. Okay, that's good. All right, I think we can, people go, right?
Great.
And then you have to.
I do, I gotta go.